Now we're in a situation where funding is lapsing today, in fact, for what is called SNAP, otherwise known as food stamps. It is essentially government subsidies for buying groceries if you're a lower income person. About 42 million Americans normally receive that on a monthly basis, and now they won't. So that obviously is a pretty major problem. There are also other separate effects on, for example, air traffic controllers who are less inclined to show up for work because they're not getting paid instantly or not getting paid on the regular schedule. Things like that have real world effects too.
Now, as I was just saying, Donald Trump is back from his trip to Asia, which has been hailed as a big success by his MAGA base. But the situation domestically in the US is a bit more, shall we say, fraught, with the federal government shutdown reaching its 31st day. Now, the shutdown was the result of a stalemate between the Democrats and the Republicans failing to come to an agreement over extending the subsidies for the Affordable Care Act. Well, let's welcome Niall Stanage, the White House columnist at The Hill. Niall, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us.
Pleasure to be here. I hope you don't expect me to compete with that aria you were just playing. That was great.
Well, don't let me stop you if you want to have a go, Niall. But why don't we...
No, your listeners don't want that inflicted on them, I assure you.
I'd like to keep them listening. Yes, let's talk about this government shutdown, because it's now entering its second month. What does it actually mean for the US public? There are people now going without payments. There are people reliant on food banks that are not receiving the help they need. Give us a little bit of a picture of how people are being affected by this.
Yeah, I mean, long story short, the effects of the shutdown become more severe the longer it goes on. So in the initial stages, we saw things like the closure of some national parks and so forth. Irritating if you want to visit a national park, but not a fundamental matter of human welfare, perhaps. Now we're in a situation where funding is lapsing today, in fact, for what is called SNAP, otherwise known as food stamps. It is essentially government subsidies for buying groceries if you're a lower income person. About 42 million Americans normally receive that on a monthly basis, and now they won't. So that obviously is a pretty major problem. There are also other separate effects on, for example, air traffic controllers who are less inclined to show up for work because they're not getting paid instantly or not getting paid on the regular schedule. Things like that have real world effects too.
Who are the public blaming for the government shutdown? Of course, the Democrats will be blaming the Republicans, the Democrats, but put politicians aside, what do the public think?
The polling suggests there are a bit more people blaming Donald Trump and the Republicans than blaming the Democrats. It's not a slam dunk either way, but the thinking appears to be that the Republicans have control of Capitol Hill. They have majorities in both the Senate and the House of Representatives, and of course, Donald Trump in the White House. So therefore, they are carrying more of the can for government being shut down.
I'm looking at the markets. Sometimes they're useful to get wind of what people expect to happen. And from what I can see in the markets, the question of when will the government shutdown end, it's not looking too good. I mean, it looks like it's set to continue for the foreseeable future.
Yes, I mean, it's inherently hard to predict. There haven't been really very substantive moves to solve it so far. Now, we do separately have some elections here, not a full midterms, but there is an election day with several contests on Tuesday. There is some speculation here in Washington that beyond that, there may be a greater willingness to compromise. And I think there is a realization that this can't go on forever. I mean, it could realistically go on for several more weeks. And as I say, the effects would get more severe, but it can't go on forever.
Trump was also talking about the filibuster rule in the Senate to bring the government back in. Just could you briefly explain to us what that rule is and why would it make a difference to the government shutdown?
Yes, briefly, the Senate operates on the principle that it is supposed to seek consensus. It's a 100-member body, and one of the chief ways of establishing that consensus is the need sometimes for a 60-vote supermajority to move things along. That works all very well if you have politicians engaging in good faith. It works a lot less well in the current polarized moment when, Democrats overwhelmingly vote one way and Republicans vote the other. If you got rid of that 60 vote requirement, Republicans could much more easily move the legislation to open the government without making perhaps any concessions to Democrats.
And do you think there is any chance of the filibuster rule being scrapped?
It's possible that they might try to carve out an exception in this case. Senators broadly quite like the filibuster rule. Senators tend to be very invested in the institution itself. So I'm not seeing a majority to get rid of the filibuster eternally right now, but whether there'll be some workaround aimed at reopening the government is a different question.
And just finally, Neil, again, looking at the markets, Zoran Mamdani, of course, in the New York City mayoral election, which is upcoming, he looks pretty much like the absolute favourite. Is this going to be a new battle, a new adversary for President Trump?
It is very much so. Zoran Mamdani, by American standards, is very hard left. Now, he's probably, frankly, not as hard left as, say, someone like Jeremy Corbyn in British politics, but by American standards, he's socialist, And he and Trump have rhetorically tangled before. Trump has suggested that Mamdani's election, if it happens on Tuesday, would lead to all sorts of baleful effects on New York City. And of course, we have seen Trump deploy National Guard and things like that to other cities with democratic leaderships. So all of those things are in play if Mamdani wins, as he's expected to do on Tuesday, though, of course, no election result is ever guaranteed.
Yeah, expect fireworks. Just finally, looking at the net approval of the president, he seems to have got to a new low. Now, I'm taking these numbers from the Silver Bulletin, Nate Silver, which is a collection of the top polls all sort of squeezed into one. He now stands at minus 10.8% of net approval. What's more worrying is when it comes to inflation and the economy, it doesn't look good for the president. Minus 27% net approval on the way that he's dealing with inflation, and minus 16% the way he's dealing with the economy. Are these numbers worrying Donald Trump at all? He talks about having the highest numbers. Let's put that aside. He can say whatever he wants. Someone's looking at these numbers. And are they worrying the president, do you think, or the administration?
I think they're worrying the administration because for all of Donald Trump's dominance of the political narrative, those numbers are mediocre at best. He's actually pretty unpopular. That's never good for any president, obviously. The political danger would be if Republicans start distancing themselves from Trump on account of those numbers. That hasn't really happened. But just briefly, Alexis, to your point on inflation. Inflation was a big issue under the Biden administration. Trump campaigned about bringing prices down. The rate of inflation is not appreciably different from where it was when he took office. There's a whole debate about whether his tariff regime has kept inflation more stubborn than it would otherwise be. But that's a real problem, especially to those people in Trump's base who are of more working class or lower income classifications. They're really feeling this continued inflation on things like grocery prices, which brings us back to where we started with the SNAP benefits and the shutdown.
Neil, thank you so much for giving us your time. Really good to speak to you. Neil Stanage there, White House columnist at The Hill.